The Ford Mustang remains an American icon. Think blue jeans, apple pie, baseball, and the Mustang. The car that launched in the mid-60s went on to establish its own segment in the automotive marketplace and spawned several competing models from other manufacturers. No offense to Barracuda fans, those are cool, but it's the Mustang that most folks think of in this space. Fast forward to today, however, and it's the Mustang that perseveres and remains the pony car to buy. Still, with it lasting as long as it has, there are many versions from which you can choose. So which generation of the Ford Mustang is the right one for you? There's debate about who and how the Mustang name came to be for the then forthcoming sporty Ford coupe. The first prototype of the car was shown in 1962 and dubbed the Mustang I. The co-designer of that car, John Najjar, credited his love of the P-51 Mustang, while Ford market research manager Robert Eggert says it was his love of breeding horses that sparked the Mustang name being applied even earlier. Regardless, the name works, and the car launches in its production form to the world partway through 1964. The very first run of cars are actually considered 64 and a half, but really the start of the first generation Mustang falls to the 65 model year. The first gen Mustang was predicted to sell fewer than 100,000 units in its first year. It beat that number in its first 3 months. In the first 18 months of production, Ford built more than 1 million examples. First, Ford rolled out the coupe and convertible models. Shortly after, the Fastback joined the party. The first engines offered were a 170 cubic inch thrift power straight six, making 101 horsepower, and a 260 cubic inch V8, good for 164 horsepower. Those engines were quickly dumped in favor of the 200 straight six, making 120 horsepower, and the 289 V8. With the 289, you have a 200 horsepower 2-barrel version called the C code, a 225 horsepower 4-barrel A code, and the one you actually want, the 270 plus horsepower K code. Things really kick up a notch starting in 1967, however, as the engine base starts to allow for larger engines. I'm talking about the 302, the 390 FE, and even on up to the 427 and 428. The car was lightly redesigned for 69 and 70 and continues to improve on the performance side with the addition of the 351 options, as well as the insane 429. That Boss 429, by the way, is basically a homologated NASCAR engine, and those cars are pretty rare. On the other end of the power spectrum, Ford added a 250 cubic inch straight six that lives between the 200 inline six and that 302 V8. The first gen continues on with a light styling refresh for the 71 through 73 model years. It's not quite as pretty as the earlier cars, but there are still great engine options offered. Plus, since people truly prefer the earlier cars, you can often scoop up these later first gens for a bit less. As far as the price of the first gen Mustang goes, it's been a bit crazy the last few years. People are asking for a few $1,000s for straight six rust buckets or even cars with no engines. It's wild. Fastback shells were going for 30 grand and up for a while. That seems to have calmed down a little bit. You can find coupes and convertibles for far less, especially if you start with a rough project car and go from there. See Exhibit A behind me. If I told you what I bought for this car, you'd call me a liar. But to start, you need to be in the 12,000 and up range for a decent looking and nice running V8 coupe. Now, on to Gen 2, and after looking at the Gen 1 cars, let me apologize. Ford wanted to downsize the Mustang in the face of the gas crisis, so it built the car on the same platform as the Pinto. It's called the Mustang II, and if you're shopping for one of these, well, bless your heart. The model run spans 1974 to 1978, and yes, there is a V8 option. The base engine is a 2.3-liter inline 4. Next is the 2.8-liter V6, and finally is the 302, but that doesn't arrive until the 75 model year. It only made 140 horsepower anyway and was capable of a not-so-Mustang-like 0 to 60 time of 10 and a half seconds. Still, if you're itching to own an example of Motor Trend's Car of the Year for 1974, I can currently only see 5 examples for sale on Autotrader Classics. Here they are. Okay, on to a much better Mustang in the Fox-Body 3rd gen cars. I am here to say it, the Fox-Body has aged like fine wine. Sure, I could see some complaints about interior materials, but that's for every car of this era. The shape is awesome, and the Fox marks a return to proper Mustang performance. The third-gen Mustang runs from '79 to 1993. You've got a coupe, or notchback as folks call it, the hatchback, and the convertible for your body style choices. Initially, Ford used carryover engine options from the Mustang II, so you have a Turbo 4, a 2.8-liter V6, and a V8. It started with a 302, switched to a 4.2-liter V8, then returned to the 5.0 or 4.9 for 1982. 1982 was a nice year as it also marks the return of the Mustang GT. Then in '84, we get the turbocharged Mustang SVO. This one would make 175 horse to start, be upgraded to make 205 part of the way through 1985, and then wind up at an even 200 horsepower for '86. That essentially mimics the horsepower of the 5-liter as well. But if you're Fox shopping, I say start your search with the 1987 models on up. The Mustang got a mid-cycle refresh and the style gets much better. The SVO goes away, but V8 sticks around and is even better thanks to some internal improvements. Now the GT cars make 225 horsepower and 300 pound-feet of torque. Finally, in 1993, Ford releases the SVT Cobra and Cobra R. Both versions featured 302 power, but the R deletes stuff like the rear seats, air conditioning, and even the stereo. It also gets larger brakes, extra cooling, and a different suspension setup. While just under 5,000 Cobras were built, only 107 Cobra Rs left the factory for the '93 model year. The price range on the Fox-Body is all over the map, and you can find great driver examples for low 10s and excellent examples in the mid-20s. The Cobra, however, is a different ballgame. I found an awesome example with a $64,000 asking price. The Cobra R, yeah, good luck finding one for sale, but when they do come up, it's usually via an auction and it's gonna fetch some serious coin. Moving on, we're getting to the time of a more modern feeling Mustang with the 4th generation vehicles. These are the ones referred to as the SN95 models. There's still a version of the Fox platform under the skin, but the cars are otherwise totally different from the 3rd gen Mustangs. The model year runs from 1994 through 2004. There's no more notch versus fastback or hatch. It's now just a coupe and a convertible as the two available body styles. Power-wise, the Mustang really wakes up for its SN95 run. The base engine for the first 4 years is a 3.8-liter V6. It's not exciting and makes around 150 horsepower. Let's talk V8s though, as that's what most of you care about. The initial SN95 Mustang GT has the 5.0 under the hood. I'm calling it that just like everyone else, even if it's 4.94 liters. Here it's making 215 horsepower and 285 pound-feet of torque. It's a carryover from that '93 Mustang GT, but 1995 would see the final year for the pushrod 5.0 because Ford was ready to drop its 4.6-liter modular V8. Initially, it makes the same power as the older engine, but the numbers start creeping up by 1998, where it's making 225 horse and 290 pound-feet of torque. In the 96 to 98 Cobra models, Ford says it's doling out 305 horsepower. And if you're an SN95 Cobra fan, this is the era of the Mystic Cobra and its chrome illusion paint. Starting in 1995, the SN95 gets its new edge facelift. The GT and its 4.6-liter V8 deliver 260 horsepower and 302 pound-feet of torque, but the V6 finally climbs up to nearly 200 horsepower as well. I mentioned more power though, and I meant it, and you can find it in the SN95 special models. There's a handful of Cobras, but you also have a return of the Cobra R. Crazy limited numbers once again. I'm talking 250 made for the 1995 version, but it makes 300 horsepower, has a big fuel cell, a Tremec 5-speed, and lots of weight saving. And if you wanted to buy one originally, you actually needed a racing license. I feel like they should bring that back for some of today's insanely powered machines. You've also got the 2001 Bullet, and then in 03 to 04, Ford created a Mach 1 version with Cobra power and a retro-inspired interior. The absolutely monstrous 2000 SVT Cobra R with its 5.4 liter 385 horsepower engine, just 300 of those were made. The Terminator Cobra is offered in 03 and 04 and makes 390 horsepower thanks to a supercharger bolted to that modular V8. There's a low run Mystic Chrome Cobra in 04, and then there are a handful of anniversary models and random regular Cobra coupes and convertibles sprinkled in as well. Honestly, I could do a video just on the SN95 era and it would be equally as long as this whole video. But this one marks the first version where we can shop for both on Autotrader Classics and normal Autotrader. Once again, prices vary wildly depending on which model you're checking out. Standard driver-ready high-mileage GTs can be found for $10K or even less. You can even find good deals on standard Cobra models and low-mileage GTs. On the flip side, the super desirable stuff is as expensive as you'd think. All right, now on to the 5th gen S197 Mustang. These run from 05 on up to 2014. The base model cars feature a 4-liter V6, good for 210 horsepower. GTs are still rocking with the 4.6 liter and it's good for 300 horsepower. There's a GT500 introduced in 2007 that features a supercharged 5.4 liter V8 and it's rated at 500 horsepower, but it's a bit of a nightmare to drive unless you really know what you're doing. The Bullet models return for the 08 and 09 model years. Shelby comes back in 09 with the GT500 KR or King of the Road, and that one features a wild 540 horsepower tune for the 5.4 liter engine. The car gets a style update in 2010. Then in 2011, the V6 option is a new 3.7 liter unit cranking out an impressive 305 horsepower and 280 pound-feet of torque. The more exciting introduction, however, is the return of the 5 liter, and it arrives with the name Coyote. In its base form, it's delivering a very meaty 412 horsepower and 390 pound-feet of torque. In 2012, Ford drops the oh-so-excellent Boss 302. Now you're cooking with 444 horsepower, while the Laguna Seca version of the Boss adds on all sorts of stuff to stiffen up the chassis, Recaro seats, a Torsen limited slip out back, and it ditches the rear seats. Just 1,500 were made across a 2-year production run. The GT500 continues to evolve until we get to the 2013 version, which swaps in a 5.8 liter supercharged V8. It produces a downright hilarious 662 horsepower and 631 pound-feet of torque, and it boasts a top speed of 202 miles an hour. Clean, high-mileage early examples of the S197 can be found for well under 10K. You can find early GT500s for under 40. The big motor GT500s, however, are typically asking about $100,000. But deals, relatively speaking, are out there if you look. Regular Boss 302s seem to trade from the low 30s up to the 60s, and you can even find Laguna Seca versions in the 50s as well. Okay, are you still with me? We're rounding third here with the 6th gen Mustang dubbed the S550. This is the first truly global Mustang. Here the model years run from 2015 up to 2023. Your engine options range from a 300 horsepower 3.7 liter V6 on up to the 435 horsepower 5.0. But Ford also introduces the 310 horsepower 2 liter EcoBoost Turbo 4. Eventually, Ford kicks the V6 to the curb, leaving the EcoBoost as the entry-level option. There's more fun to come though after the S550 gets a facelift in 2018. For one, torque rises on the EcoBoost models. Another is the fact that the Coyote is now making 460 horsepower and 420 pound-feet of torque. Just to note that the 2022 and 23 models see power dip just a bit to 450 and 410 torque due to emissions requirements. Still, the overall power on tap is great for both EcoBoost and V8 models, but there's always more, right? That's a big yes thanks to the GT350 that's introduced for 2015 with its oh-so-awesome Voodoo V8 engine. This is the 5.2 liter flat plane crank engine that doles out 526 horsepower and some truly glorious noise. The GT350R version goes a step further as the first mass-market car to get carbon fiber wheels. The GT350 goes away in 2020 so that Ford can trot out the GT500 for 2 years. It ditches the Voodoo for what's dubbed the Predator V8. This one is a 5.2 liter engine, but it's supercharged to deliver 760 horsepower, a 0 to 60 time in the low 3-second range, and Ford tosses on huge brakes, tons of cooling, and a dual clutch gearbox. 2 more models to consider from this generation would be the 2019 to 2020 Bullet and the 21 to 23 Mach 1, both of which featured a 480 horsepower Coyote V8. There are a few other random limited editions and anniversary models, but those I've just mentioned are what I'd consider the highlights. A clean S550 GT can be found with prices ranging from the high teens to the upper $30,000 range, depending on the year and mileage. GT500s are typically right around $100,000 or higher. That GT350R is available for not insane money too if you do some shopping. Ford built just over 3,600 of them, with the 2015 model year being the most rare of the bunch. Just 37 were made that year. Now we arrive at the current 7th gen Mustang, the S650. This one could be much more familiar since it's the latest one I've discussed in past videos. The gist is that we've got the EcoBoost 4-cylinder, which makes 315 horsepower, the 480 plus horsepower GT, and now we add on the 500 horsepower Dark Horse. EcoBoosts only come with the 10-speed auto. There's a GetDrag 6-speed available for the GT, and the Dark Horse comes with the better Tremec 6-speed manual. 10 speeds are available on all of them if you want the automatic. Soon, Ford should start shipping the truly wild Mustang GT-D, which features a supercharged 5.2-liter engine good for 815 horsepower, but that's a low-run, high-dollar GT3 race car for the street. So unless Ford has already told you you're good to buy one, don't worry about that one. With this latest Mustang, you're looking for used EcoBoosts in the mid-$20,000 range, used GTs in the mid-30s to low 40s on the lower end, and I found a used Dark Horse in the low 50s. But of course, you can also go certified pre-owned or brand new with this one since it's the current Mustang. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, and I feel like I've only scratched the surface. No, I'm not going to talk about versions offered by companies like Roush or Saleen. I'm not bringing the Mercury Cougar into this discussion, and obviously we're not talking about the Mach-E, which is a fine machine, but that's not the sort of Mustang we're on about today. All I've done here is provide a very basic roadmap of the many generations of the Mustang to help you maybe narrow down your choices if you're in the market for one. So which one is the right Mustang generation for you?